A biker pulled into a dark parking lot, just trying to escape the rain. But what he found inside that van would change 12 lives, and his own, forever. Inside were terrified women and children, locked away, forgotten by the world. He could have walked away. But something inside him, something buried for years, told him to stay. Now, hunted by traffickers and betrayed by the law, this broken man must fight to protect the only people who ever believed in him. Every second counts. Every choice could mean life or death. But here's the question that will haunt you. Can a man who lost everything find redemption by saving others? Or will the darkness he escaped come back to claim them all? The rumble of thunder echoed across the empty parking lot as the biker cut his engine. His weathered Harley gave a final sputter before going silent, leaving him alone with the whistling wind and the first heavy drops of rain. The neon sign of the abandoned diner buzzed weakly above him, casting intermittent red shadows across the cracked asphalt. He ran a calloused hand over his face, feeling the day's worth of stubble beneath his fingers. The torn leather of his jacket let in a chill that made him shiver, though he'd known worse, much worse. Prison cells were colder than this, and lonelier too, even if the empty lot brought back memories he'd rather forget. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the desolate scene. Weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete, and sheets of old newspaper tumbled past like urban tumbleweeds. The diner's windows were boarded up, their plywood surfaces covered in graffiti that had faded to ghostly shadows of color. "Perfect," he muttered, swinging his leg over the bike. "Just perfect." The biker had been riding since dawn, trying to put miles between himself and his last stop. He never stayed anywhere too long these days. Staying meant connecting, and connecting meant explaining. There were too many questions he couldn't answer, too many memories he couldn't face. Better to keep moving, even if it meant nights like this. He pulled his jacket tighter, though it didn't help much with the tear. That had been courtesy of a close call with a guardrail 2 states back, when fatigue had gotten the better of him. The rain was coming down harder now, drops hitting his leather like tiny hammers. The broken streetlight above him flickered erratically, creating dancing shadows that played tricks on his tired eyes. He'd been pushing too hard, trying to outrun ghosts that had been chasing him for longer than he cared to admit. His daughter would be what, 22 now? 23? He'd lost track of the years, marked only by prison calendars and endless highways. Finding partial shelter beneath the diner's damaged awning, he leaned against the wall and watched the storm roll in. The thunder was getting closer, each boom rattling the loose pieces of metal on the building's facade. Lightning illuminated the parking lot in stark flashes, revealing a handful of abandoned vehicles that had been left to rust. Casualties of whatever economic downturn had killed this place. The biker pulled out a battered pack of cigarettes, then thought better of it. He'd been trying to quit, one of many attempts at small redemptions that never seemed to add up to anything meaningful. Instead, he focused on the rain, letting the steady drumming drown out the thoughts that always seemed to catch up with him when he stayed still too long. A particularly bright flash of lightning revealed more details of his surroundings. The lot was bigger than he'd first thought, stretching back into darkness where the streetlight's reach failed. He could make out the shapes of more vehicles back there, a couple of old sedans, what might have been a pickup truck, and a white van parked far from the road. The wind picked up, howling through the empty building behind him. It carried the musty smell of decay, of places long abandoned and forgotten. The biker had known plenty of those too, had sought them out since his release. Places where no one asked questions, where a man could disappear into the background like just another shadow. He checked his watch. Nearly midnight. The storm showed no signs of letting up. The rain now coming down in sheets that turned the world beyond the awning into a gray blur. Sleep tugged at him, but he knew better than to let his guard down completely. Years inside had taught him that lesson well enough. Another flash of lightning, another roll of thunder that seemed to shake the very ground. The biker shifted his weight, feeling the familiar ache in his knee from an old injury. That's when he heard it. So on he might have missed it if the thunder hadn't died down at just the right moment. A banging sound, metallic and desperate, coming from somewhere in the darkness beyond the streetlight's reach. At first, he tried to ignore it. Whatever it wasn't his problem. He'd learned the hard way that getting involved only led to trouble, and trouble was something he'd had his fill of. But then the sound came again, more distinct this time. The biker tensed, years of instinct kicking in as he scanned the darkness. The sound was coming from the direction of that white van he'd spotted earlier. He told himself it was probably nothing. Maybe just something loose being blown by the wind, or some animal that had gotten itself trapped. Then he heard something else, something that made his blood run cold. A cry, high-pitched and frightened, barely audible over the storm, but unmistakably human. Unmistakably young. His heart began to pound, each beat like a hammer against his ribs. The cry came again, and this time there was no mistaking it for anything else. It was a child's voice, filled with fear and desperation. The biker stood frozen for a moment, wrestling with decades of hard-learned lessons about minding his own business. He'd spent years building walls around himself, keeping the world at arm's length. Getting involved meant risking those walls, meant opening himself up to complications he'd sworn to avoid. But that cry triggered something deeper than his carefully constructed defenses. It reached past the hardened exterior to touch a part of himself he thought he'd buried for good. The part that remembered holding his own daughter, that still ached with the knowledge of how he'd failed her. Moving with a purpose now, he went to his bike and opened one of the saddlebags. His fingers found the heavy flashlight he kept there, its metal cold against his palm. The weight of it was reassuring as he straightened up, water running down his face as he stepped out. From under the awning, the rain hammered against his shoulders as he moved forward, his boots splashing through growing puddles. Each step took him further from the flickering streetlight, deeper into the shadows where the van waited. The banging sound came again, more urgent now, accompanied by another muffled cry. His heart pounded faster with each step, though his movements remained controlled, deliberate. Years of experience had taught him to approach unknown situations with caution, to be ready for anything. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, reflecting off the wet surface of the white van as he drew closer. Thunder crashed overhead, and lightning turned night to day for a split second. In that brief illumination, he could see that the van was newer than the other abandoned vehicles, its white paint clean despite the rain. This was no forgotten wreck. It had been parked here deliberately, hidden in the shadows where the road couldn't see it. The biker's boots splashed through deepening puddles as he approached the van, rain streaming down his face and soaking through his torn jacket. His flashlight beam bounced off the vehicle's wet surface, creating ghostly reflections in the darkness. The closer he got, the clearer the sounds became. Shuffling movements, muffled whimpers, and that persistent banging that had first caught his attention. His hand trembled slightly as he raised the flashlight to peer through the van's side window. The glass was foggy with condensation, but he could make out shifting shapes inside. Far too many shapes for this to be normal. His breath caught in his throat as he counted the silhouettes. 5, 8, maybe more, all crowded together in the cargo area. Lightning flashed again, and for a brief moment, everything was crystal clear. His heart nearly stopped when a small face suddenly pressed against the window directly in front of him. Big eyes, filled with terror and hope, stared into his. The little girl's lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear through the glass. "Help us." "Jesus," he whispered, his fingers already wrapping around the door handle. He yanked it hard, but it didn't budge. A heavy padlock secured the latch, its metal surface gleaming dully in the beam of his flashlight. The girl's face remained pressed against the window, her breath creating small clouds on the glass. The biker's mind raced. He'd seen enough in his years inside to recognize trafficking when he saw it. The isolated location, the locked van, the number of people crammed inside. It all added up to something that made his stomach turn. He'd done his share of wrong in his life, but this was different. This was evil. "Hold on," he mouthed to the girl, trying to convey reassurance through the glass. "I'm gonna get help." He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, already knowing it was a long shot. The screen remained black when he pressed the power button. Dead. Just like he'd expected. He hadn't bothered charging it in days, having no one to call and nowhere to be. Now that decision felt like a lead weight in his gut. Rain continued to pour as he scanned the area, looking for options. The diner was clearly abandoned, and there wasn't another building in sight except there, across the 4-lane highway, barely visible through the storm. A payphone booth, its plastic sides reflecting the occasional flash of lightning. "I'll be right back," he said loudly, hoping they could hear him through the van's walls. "Don't give up." The biker sprinted across the parking lot, his boots sliding on the wet pavement. Cars were few and far between at this hour, but he still had to dodge a semi-truck as he crossed the highway, its horn blaring as it passed. The rain felt like needles against his face as he ran, each step sending jolts of pain through his bad knee. The payphone booth's light flickered weakly as he yanked the door open, fumbling in his pockets for change. His fingers, numb from the cold, struggled with the coins as he fed them into the slot. The dial tone hummed in his ear as he punched in 911, watching the van across the highway through the streaked plastic of the booth. "911, what's your emergency?" The dispatcher's voice was clear despite the storm. "I need police at the old Silver Star Diner on Highway 27, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "There's a white van in the parking lot with people locked inside. Kids and women. They need help right now." "Sir, can you verify your location?" The dispatcher's tone had shifted, becoming more alert. "The abandoned diner, about 20 miles south of Preston. There's at least 10 people trapped in there. They're going to come back for them after midnight." "And your name, sir?" The biker hesitated for a split second. "Jack Morrison." He gave them the name he'd been using since his release, knowing what would happen when they ran it. There was a pause, the sound of keys clicking. When the dispatcher spoke again, her voice had cooled considerably. "Mr. Morrison, we show you have a prior record." "That doesn't matter." He slammed his palm against the booth's wall. "There are children in danger right now. Sir, we take all calls seriously, but we've had issues with false reports from individuals with similar backgrounds. Are you certain about what you're seeing?" The biker pressed his forehead against the cool plastic of the booth, frustration burning in his chest. "Listen to me. I'm looking right at them. There's a little girl with her face pressed against the window. They're scared, they're hungry, and somebody's coming back for them. Please, we'll send a car to drive by when one becomes available," the dispatcher said, her tone making it clear she didn't believe him. "Please don't tie up emergency lines with unverified." He slammed the receiver down, swearing under his breath. The booth's light flickered and died, leaving him in darkness, broken only by lightning flashes. Across the highway, the van waited in the shadows, its windows now dark squares against the white paint. The biker ran back across the road, not bothering to check for traffic this time. His mind was already working through options as he reached his motorcycle. The saddlebags held basic tools. He never traveled without them, knowing the Harley's tendency to break down at the worst moments. Among them was a heavy crowbar he used for leverage when working on the engine. He grabbed it, feeling its familiar weight in his hands. The metal was cold and slick with rain, but his grip was sure as he approached the van again. The little girl's face appeared in the window once more, her eyes widening at the sight of the tool in his hands. "Back away from the door," he called out, loud enough to be heard inside. "Everybody move to the front." The crowbar's end fit perfectly into the space between the door and its frame. The biker planted his feet, ignoring the protest from his knee as he positioned himself for maximum leverage. Years of working on engines and machinery had taught him exactly where to apply pressure, how to make metal bend to his will. He threw his whole weight against the crowbar. The metal groaned but held. Again he pushed, feeling sweat mix with rain on his face. Something had to give. Either the lock would break or the doorframe would bend. Either way, he wasn't stopping until those doors opened. With one final heave, putting every ounce of strength he had left into it, he felt, rather than heard, the latch give way. The doors swung open with a screech of tortured metal, letting out a rush of stale air and revealing the van's interior in the dim light of his flashlight. 12 pairs of eyes stared back at him, belonging to women and children huddled together on the van's floor. They were dirty, obviously hungry, and terrified. Some looked like they'd been crying recently, while others seemed too exhausted even for tears. The little girl who had caught his attention was clinging to an older woman, both of them pressed against the van's side wall. "He said he'll come back after midnight," one of the women whispered, her voice hoarse with fear. The words hung in the air like the thunder that rolled overhead, carrying the weight of a deadline that was approaching far too quickly. The biker held his flashlight steady as the first woman climbed out of the van, her legs shaking so badly she nearly fell. He caught her arm, steadying her on the wet pavement. One by one, they emerged. 5 women and 7 children, ranging from maybe 6 to 15 years old. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, but they all shivered in their thin, dirty clothes. "Easy now," he said, trying to keep his voice gentle despite the anger burning in his chest. He could see dark bruises on their wrists where zip ties had cut into their skin. Some of the children's clothes were torn, and one little boy was missing a shoe. An older woman with silver-streaked hair moved forward, her bearing somehow dignified despite her disheveled appearance. "I'm Margaret," she said quietly. "I'm a retired nurse. Let me help." There was something steady in her voice that made the biker step back, watching as she gathered 2 crying children close. "We need to get them somewhere safe," the nurse said, looking straight at him. "They're freezing, and some need medical attention." The biker nodded, scanning the area. The old diner was locked up tight, and breaking in would be too visible from the highway. But across the street, barely visible in the gloom, stood a building he knew well: Joe's Auto Repair. He'd worked there for 6 months after getting out, before Joe passed away and the place shut down. "There's a garage across the road," he said. "I know a way in. Can everybody walk?" The nurse did a quick assessment. "Maria's ankle is swollen, but we can help her. The children are exhausted but mobile." "Stay close together," the biker instructed. "When I signal, we cross fast and quiet." He led them across the highway between passing cars, supporting Maria while the nurse helped the smallest children. The group moved like shadows, their wet clothes dark against the pavement. The garage's familiar outline loomed ahead: a large metal building with 2 bay doors and a small office on the side. The side door's lock was rusted, but still worked with the key he kept on his ring. Joe had told him to keep it, just in case he ever needed work again. The biker sent up a silent thank you to the old man as the door creaked open. Inside, the garage was musty but dry. His flashlight beam revealed familiar shapes: tool chests, an old lift, stacked tires in the corner. The office would be too small for all of them, but the main garage area was spacious enough. "Over here," he directed, leading them to a clear area near the back wall. "Sit tight while I check the place out." The nurse was already organizing the group, her experience showing in how she handled their fear. "Let's get everyone sitting down," she said calmly. "Children in the middle, adults on the outside. Body heat will help keep us warm." The biker moved through the garage, checking exits and gathering what they could use. He found some old moving blankets in a cabinet, dusty but better than nothing. A quick search of Joe's office turned up an emergency kit and, thank God, a set of bolt cutters in the bottom drawer. Working quickly, he secured the bay doors with lengths of chain from the storage room, using the bolt cutters to size them properly. The main door got the same treatment. It wouldn't stop determined attackers, but it would slow them down and make noise. In a far corner, he found what he was looking for: an old oil drum. He dragged it to the center of their group, away from anything flammable. Some broken wooden pallets would make decent fuel. "Keep your eyes closed for a minute," he warned before striking a match. The fire caught quickly, casting warm light across scared faces. The children pressed closer to the barrel, holding out shaking hands to the flames. The nurse was moving among them, checking injuries with practiced efficiency. Dehydration, minor contusions, some sprains, she reported quietly when he brought her the first aid kit. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but they need proper medical care soon. One of the women, barely more than a girl herself, approached them hesitantly. She held something out in her trembling hand. "I found this in the van," she whispered. "It fell out of his jacket when he was checking on us earlier." The biker took the cheap burner phone, turning it over in his hands. The screen lit up, revealing dozens of text messages. His jaw tightened as he scrolled through them. The messages were in code, but it wasn't hard to decipher their meaning. Numbers and locations, pickup times and drop-off points, references to packages and deliveries that had nothing to do with normal shipping. This wasn't just one van or one group. It was a network, organized and efficient. He looked up at the faces illuminated by the firelight. 12 people who'd been reduced to entries in a ledger, packages to be bought and sold. The nurse caught his eye, and he saw his own anger reflected in her steady gaze. "There are more," he said quietly, holding up the phone. "More vans, more people. This is organized." The nurse nodded grimly, her hand gentle on a sleeping child's shoulder. "Then we need to make sure these ones are safe first," she said. One step at a time. Around them, the garage was starting to warm slightly from the fire's heat. The youngest children had fallen asleep, wrapped in blankets and huddled close to the adults. Their faces still showed fear, even in sleep. But at least for now, they were safe. The biker checked his watch. 10:47 p.m., just over an hour until midnight, when the van's owners would return to find their cargo gone. He looked at the phone in his hand again, thinking about all the other vans, all the other groups huddled in dark places waiting for rescue. One step at a time, the nurse had said. Right now, that meant keeping these 12 people safe until he could figure out their next move. He added another piece of broken pallet to the fire and settled in to wait, watching the shadows dance across the garage walls. The biker stood at the garage's grimy window, his breath fogging the glass as he watched the empty parking lot across the street. The moon had broken through the clouds, casting everything in pale silver light. Behind him, the rescued group huddled around the burning barrel, their whispers barely audible over the gentle crackle of burning wood. A flash of headlights swept across the lot. The biker tensed, pressing deeper into the shadows. A black SUV rolled to a stop, its engine purring smoothly. Expensive, well-maintained. Nothing like the beat-up van it was replacing. The driver's door opened, and a balcony man stepped out. Even from this distance, the biker could see how carefully he moved, deliberate, controlled. This wasn't some low-level thug. The man wore a dark suit that probably cost more than the biker's motorcycle, his shoes gleaming as he walked toward the empty van. The biker's hands curled into fists as he watched. The trafficker circled the van once, then tried the door. Finding it still unlocked, he leaned inside, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. When he straightened up, his movements were still calm, unhurried. Like finding his cargo missing was just a minor inconvenience. The man pulled out a phone and made a call. Though the biker couldn't hear the words, he could read the body language, the slight tilt of the head, the casual stance. This wasn't someone calling in panic. This was someone setting plans in motion. "Are they here?" The nurse's soft voice made him start. He hadn't heard her approach. "One of them," he whispered back. "Making calls." They watched together as the SUV began a slow circuit of the parking lot, its headlights sweeping across empty spaces and abandoned buildings. The beam passed over the garage's boarded-up windows, and the biker held his breath. But the boards and years of grime kept their shelter dark. Finally, the SUV pulled away, heading east on the highway. The biker kept watching until its taillights disappeared around a bend. "They'll be back," he said, turning away from the window. "And they'll bring others." The nurse nodded, her face grave in the firelight. I know, but we bought some time at least. They walked back to the group. Most of the adults were still awake, their eyes following the bikers' movements. The children had collapsed into exhausted sleep, curled together like puppies seeking warmth. All except one, a small girl, maybe 7 years old, tossed restlessly on her blanket. The nurse knelt beside her, touching her forehead with a gentle hand. She's burning up, the nurse murmured. Sarah, honey, can you open your eyes for me? The girl's eyes fluttered open, glassy with fever. My head hurts, she whimpered. The biker watched as the nurse worked, her movements efficient but tender. She found a clean rag in the emergency kit and soaked it with water from their dwindling supply. There now, she soothed, laying the cool cloth on Sarah's forehead. This will help. Try to rest, sweetheart. Something about the scene made the biker's chest ache. A memory surfaced. Unwanted. Unavoidable. His daughter, Emma, sick with strep throat when she was about Sarah's age. He'd been useless then, panic-stricken by her fever, while his wife handled everything with calm competence. That was before the robbery. Before prison. Before Emma's mother told him to never contact them again. Emma would be 17 now. He wondered if she still had her mother's eyes, if she'd grown tall like him. He wondered if she ever thought about him at all. The nurse's voice pulled him from his thoughts. We need supplies, she said quietly. Food, water, proper medical supplies. And these children need clean clothes. The biker nodded, studying the sleeping faces around the barrel. In the firelight, the bruises on their skin looked almost black. His hands clenched into fists again, knuckles white with barely contained rage. I'll go at first light, he said. There's a convenience store about 5 miles east. Won't have much, but it's a start. Be careful, the nurse warned. They'll be watching the roads. I know, but we can't stay here without supplies. He looked down at Sarah, still restless with fever. And some of these kids need medicine. The nurse adjusted the cool cloth on Sarah's forehead. I don't suppose you have any money. The biker reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. Inside was $300. Everything he had left from his last mechanic job. Enough for the basics, he said. We'll figure out the rest later. Sarah whimpered in her sleep, and the nurse hushed her gently. The biker watched her practiced movements, the way she stroked the girl's hair just like his wife used to do for Emma. Dawn was still hours away. The biker settled against a wall, close enough to the fire to feel its warmth, but far enough to keep watch on both the windows and the doors. Every passing car made him tense, expecting headlights to turn into the lot, expecting to hear the sounds of men searching. But for now, there was just the pop and crackle of burning wood, the soft breathing of sleeping children, and the quiet whispers of the nurse as she tended to Sarah's fever. The biker let his head rest against the wall, thinking about supplies, escape routes, and a 17-year-old girl he hadn't seen in 11 years. First light couldn't come soon enough. They needed food, medicine, clean clothes, and time was running out. The traffickers would be methodically searching every building in the area. It wouldn't take them long to find the garage, especially once daylight made their broken-down van visible from the road. He checked his watch. 4 hours until sunrise. 4 hours to plan, to prepare, to figure out how to keep 12 people safe from men who saw them as nothing but merchandise. His gaze drifted to Sarah again, to her small face pinched with fever, and his fists clenched one more time. Whatever it took, he wouldn't let them take these people back. Not now. Not ever. Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The biker pulled his motorcycle around to the back of the garage, keeping it hidden from the road. His leather jacket was stiff with dried rain, and exhaustion weighed heavy on his shoulders after a sleepless night. The nurse appeared at his side, her silver hair glowing in the early light. Be careful, she whispered. Those men, they have connections. Eyes everywhere. He nodded, checking the empty backpack slung across his shoulders. I know. Lock up behind me. Don't open for anyone else. Inside, Most of the group still slept. Sarah's fever had broken sometime before dawn, and she curled peacefully beside two other girls. The biker paused at the door, memorizing their faces. Then he slipped out into the morning, the click of the lock behind him oddly final. The ride into town took longer than usual. He kept to back roads, watching his mirrors for any sign of pursuit. The morning traffic was light, mostly work trucks and early shift employees stopping for coffee. No sign of black SUVs or men in expensive suits. The thrift store sat on the edge of town, a weathered building with sun-faded signs in the windows. The bell over the door jingled as he entered, making him wince. An elderly woman at the register barely glanced up from her magazine. "Just browsing," he mumbled, heading for the clothing racks. He moved methodically through the store, pulling items that looked warm and sturdy: kids' sweaters, thick socks, a pile of t-shirts. When the clerk wasn't looking, he stuffed them into his backpack, along with packages of new underwear from a display near the fitting rooms. The theft sat heavy in his stomach. He hadn't stolen anything since the robbery that sent him to prison. But desperate times called for desperate measures. In the men's section, he made a show of examining jackets while slipping protein bars and dried fruit from his pockets into the pack. He'd grabbed them from a gas station on the way into town, knowing the thrift store wouldn't have food. The clerk finally looked up as he approached the register. He carried a single flannel shirt, his decoy purchase. She rang it up with disinterested efficiency. "That'll be $4.59. He handed over a $5 bill, careful to keep his movements casual. "Keep the change." The diner across the street was doing steady breakfast business. The biker chose a seat at the counter, ordering coffee he didn't want just to blend in. Two truckers sat a few stools down, their conversation drifting over the clatter of dishes and sizzling griddle. "Third group this month," the older trucker was saying. "State police found their bus abandoned on Route 16. The other trucker shook his head. "Damn shame. My sister's kid goes to that school. They were supposed to be on some field trip to the science museum. Never made it there. Whole busload of kids just vanished. Police say it's probably connected to those other disappearances over in Marshall County." The biker's hands tightened around his coffee cup. Marshall County was less than 50 miles away. "They're saying it's organized," the first trucker continued. "Not just random sickos. These guys know what they're doing, professional-like. Jesus!" The younger trucker pushed his plate away. "Makes you wonder who's really behind it all. Gotta be someone with money, connections." The biker had heard enough. He left $1 by his half-empty cup and walked out, forcing himself not to hurry. His mind raced as he mounted his bike. This was bigger than he'd thought. The coded messages on the burner phone, the well-dressed man in the SUV, and now missing busloads of children. This wasn't just a local operation. The ride back to the garage seemed to take forever. Every vehicle that passed made him tense, expecting pursuit. But no one followed him down the winding back roads, and the parking lot was empty when he finally pulled up behind the building. He knocked their agreed-upon signal. 3 quick taps, pause, 2 more. The lock clicked, and the nurse's worried face appeared in the gap. "Thank God," she breathed, letting him in. "We were starting to worry." The garage looked different in daylight. Dust motes danced in the thin beams that filtered through the boards, and someone had swept the floor clean with an old push broom. The barrel that had held their fire was empty now, the ashes carefully disposed of. But the biggest change was in the people. The children sat in small groups, playing quiet games with found objects. Bottle caps arranged in patterns, a length of rope fashioned into a cat's cradle. Their faces were still drawn and tired, but some of the raw fear had faded. "I found some old board games in the office," the nurse explained, following his gaze. "And Mary used to be a teacher. She's been wonderful with them." One of the younger girls looked up as he set down his pack. Her eyes widened, and suddenly she was running toward him, thin arms wrapping around his leg. "You came back," she whispered into his jeans. The words hit him like a physical blow. How many adults had abandoned these children? How many had promised safety, only to disappear? He looked down at her dark curls, her tiny fingers clutching his pants leg, and felt something crack in his chest. A wall he'd built years ago, brick by bitter brick, began to crumble. The nurse touched his shoulder. "We never doubted you would." He couldn't speak past the tightness in his throat. Instead, he gently detached the girl and knelt to open his pack. "Got some clothes," he managed, "and food. Not much, but—" "It's perfect," the nurse said firmly. She began sorting through the items, creating neat piles. "Sarah, honey, come help distribute these." The children gathered around as the nurse handed out clothes and snacks. The biker stepped back, watching their faces light up at simple things. Clean socks, protein bars, a warm sweater. The little girl who'd hugged him clutched a purple t-shirt to her chest like it was made of gold. A soft buzz broke through the moment. The burner phone, sitting on a workbench where they'd left it, lit up with an incoming message. The biker's stomach clenched as he picked it up. The message was short, just an address and a time. "Loading dock behind Carson's warehouse. Tomorrow, 0200. New pickup." He showed it to the nurse, whose face went pale. "Another group?" "Yeah." He set the phone down carefully, too. Carefully. "They're not going to stop." The little girl was still watching him, her new shirt hugged tight against her chest. Her eyes held too much knowledge for someone so young, too much understanding of the darkness in the world. But there was something else there too. Trust. She believed in him, this child who had every reason never to trust again. He looked down at her and felt the last of his defenses crack. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel something beyond guilt and regret. Purpose flickered to life in his chest, warm and certain as a flame. The biker sat on an overturned milk crate, turning the burner phone over in his calloused hands. Sunlight streamed through the dusty garage windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The message glowed on the screen. "Carson's warehouse, 10 p.m. His jaw tightened. Another group of kids would be waiting there, scared and alone, just like the ones sleeping on blankets across the garage floor. He'd been staring at that message for an hour, knowing the police wouldn't help. His earlier call to 911 had proven that. His record made him unreliable in their eyes. But he knew someone who might listen, someone who straddled the line between legal and illegal, just like he used to. The phone felt heavy in his hand as he dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "Yeah? Rollo, it's me." A long pause followed. Well, the ghost himself. Thought you rode off into the sunset for good. Need your help with something?" The biker kept his voice low, glancing at the sleeping children. "It's important. Important like that job in Tucson? 'Cause that kind of important landed you 15 years. "No, different kind of important." He took a deep breath. "Kids are involved. Bad situation." Another pause, longer this time. The biker could almost hear Rollo's mind working through the implications. Finally, "Meet me at the yard in 30 minutes. You remember where?" "Yeah. Still got that place off Highway 9? "Same spot. Different sign." Rollo's voice hardened. "And brother?" "Come alone." The line went dead. The biker pocketed the phone and stood, his knees creaking. The nurse looked up from where she was sorting through their meager supplies. "You're going somewhere?" Her voice was quiet, but carried a note of concern. "Got to see someone. Might be able to help." He grabbed his jacket from the workbench. "Won't be long." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Be careful." The morning air was crisp as he guided his Harley through the industrial outskirts of town. Rollo's towing yard sat between a defunct paper mill and an auto parts warehouse, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. The sign was indeed different. Rollo's Recovery and Towing in fresh red paint. But the guard dogs were the same, their deep barks echoing across the lot as he pulled up to the gate. Rollo emerged from a small office, silencing the dogs with a sharp whistle. He looked older than the biker remembered, grayer at the temples, heavier around the middle, but his eyes were still sharp as tacks under busy eyebrows. 15 years, Rollo said by way of greeting. You look like hell. You're no beauty queen yourself. A ghost of a smile crossed Rollo's face. He jerked his head toward the office. Come on, coffee's hot. The office was cluttered but organized in its own way. Tow logs and invoices filled metal filing cabinets. A police scanner crackled quietly on a shelf. 3 monitors showed different views of the yard, and a mini fridge hummed in the corner. Rollo poured 2 cups of coffee and settled behind his desk. So, kids, huh? The biker nodded, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. In short, clip sentences, he laid out what he'd found. The van, the traffickers, the messages on the burner phone. Rollo's expression grew darker with each detail. Jesus Christ, he muttered when the biker finished. You stumbled into something big here, brother. These aren't street-level pimps. This is organized, professional. I know. That's why I need your help. The biker leaned forward. They're moving another group tonight. Need to see what we're dealing with. Rollo rubbed his jaw, considering. Then he stood and walked to a locked cabinet in the corner. Got some things might help. Been collecting gear over the years. Never know when it'll come in handy. He pulled out a duffel bag and started filling it. A police scanner, smaller than the one on the shelf. 3 disposable cameras. A pair of night vision binoculars that looked military surplus. A handheld radio set. Cameras are old school, but they work, Rollo explained. No digital trail. Scanners programmed for all local frequencies. Police, fire, security companies. Binoculars work better than you'd think, even with fresh batteries. The biker watched him work, surprised by the thoroughness. You've done this before. Rollo's hand stilled for a moment. Let's just say you're not the first person to need eyes on something without being seen. He zipped the bag and set it on the desk. But brother, listen to me. These people you're messing with, they're connected. They got money, influence. They find out someone's watching them. They won't just come after you. They'll burn everything you touch. Already thought of that? No, you haven't. Rollo's voice was deadly serious. I've seen what happens to people who cross them. They don't just kill you. They make examples. They hurt everyone you ever cared about. The biker thought of the little girl who'd hugged his leg, of her trust in him, of the nurse's quiet strength, of all those children sleeping on garage floors, waiting for someone, anyone, to help them. Can't walk away from this one, Rollo. Rollo studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah, figured you'd say that. He pushed the duffel bag across the desk. Carson's warehouse, you said? I know it. Loading docks on the east side, backed up against the railroad tracks. Good sight lines from the old grain elevator across the way. The biker stood, slinging the bag over his shoulder. Thanks, Rollo. Don't thank me yet. Rollo walked him to the door. Just be careful, yeah? These people, they'll burn you down if they catch you. The ride back to the garage seemed shorter. The weight of the duffel bag a reminder of purpose rather than burden. When he pulled up, the nurse was waiting by the door, worry lines creasing her forehead. Everything okay? He nodded, carrying the bag inside. The children were awake now, sharing a quiet breakfast of protein bars and bottled water. Some looked up as he entered, their eyes following him with that mix of fear and hope he was starting to recognize. Got to go out again tonight, he told the nurse quietly. Few hours, maybe less. Going to watch something. She glanced at the duffel bag, understanding dawning in her eyes. More children? Yeah, but not for long. He set the bag down carefully. Going to stop it this time. Stop all of it. The little girl who'd hugged him earlier came over, tugging at his jacket. You're leaving? He knelt down to her level, finding it easier now to meet those 2 old eyes. Just for a little while. Got to help some other kids, like I helped you. But I'll come back. Promise. She studied his face with that unnerving intensity children sometimes have. Then she nodded solemnly. Okay. But be careful of the bad men. I will, sweetheart. He stood, looking at the nurse. Few hours. That's all. She touched his arm briefly. We'll be here. Just come back to us. The old grain elevator loomed against the darkening sky, like a giant's forgotten tombstone. From their vantage point on its third floor, the biker and Rollo had a clear view of Carson's warehouse across the railroad tracks. Wind whistled through broken windows, carrying the sharp scent of rust and decay. Rollo adjusted the night vision binoculars, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Place hasn't changed much. Used to store farm equipment here back in the day. The biker said nothing, eyes fixed on the warehouse loading bay below. They had arrived an hour early to scout the location, climbing the metal stairs inside the grain elevator with flashlights turned low. Now they waited in the gathering darkness, surrounded by Rollo's surveillance gear. You sure about the time? Rollo whispered, checking his watch. Message said 10. The biker's voice was tight with tension. They'll be here. Minutes crawled by like hours. A train rumbled past, its wheels clicking against the tracks. When it passed, the silence felt heavier than before. The biker shifted his weight, trying to ease the stiffness in his bad knee. At 9:55, headlights appeared at the far end of the access road. Here we go, Rollo muttered, raising the binoculars. A white panel van, similar to the one from the abandoned parking lot, backed slowly into the loading bay. Its reverse lights cast ghostly shadows across the concrete walls. Behind it, a black SUV pulled up, its engine idling. The biker's hands clenched into fists as he watched. Two men emerged from the SUV, moving with practiced efficiency. The first wore military-style boots that echoed against the pavement. The second was shorter, carrying what looked like a clipboard. Got the cameras ready, the biker whispered. Rollo nodded, already positioning one of the disposable cameras. Just like old times, eh? Except we used to be on the other side of the law. Different now. Yeah. Rollo's voice was grim. Way different. The man in boots walked to the van's rear doors and opened them. The biker's stomach turned as he watched 4 women being led out, all blindfolded, their hands bound with zip ties. They stumbled slightly, disoriented in the darkness. Jesus, Rollo breathed. He started taking pictures, the camera's quiet clicks barely audible over the SUV's idle engine. The scene below unfolded with disturbing precision. The man with the clipboard checked something off, speaking in low tones to his partner. The women were guided toward the warehouse door, their feet shuffling uncertainly on the concrete. Professional operation, Rollo observed, still photographing. Look at their positioning. They've got sight lines covered, regular patrol patterns. These aren't amateurs. The biker noticed it too. The way the men moved, their careful attention to their surroundings. It spoke of training, of experience. This wasn't some makeshift criminal enterprise. This was organized, methodical. Getting their license plates? He asked. Yeah, van's got dealer tags though. Probably stolen. Rollo adjusted his angle for a better shot. SUV's legitimate plates, but bet they're registered to a shell company. Below, the shorter man was making another note on his clipboard when a phone rang from inside the SUV. The sharp electronic tone cut through the night air like a knife. The man in boots turned suddenly, scanning the darkness. His hand moved toward his waist, where the biker could now see the outline of a holstered weapon. Down, the biker hissed, pulling Rollo away from the window. They pressed themselves against the wall, hearts pounding. The phone continued ringing. Through the broken window, they could hear boots on gravel, moving in a search pattern. He made us? Rollo whispered. Maybe. Stay still. Seconds stretched into minutes. The phone stopped ringing. Footsteps crunched closer to the grain elevator, then paused. The biker held his breath, acutely aware of how exposed they were if someone decided to sweep the building. Finally, a voice called out, "All clear, but do another perimeter check when you're done." The footsteps retreated. The biker risked a glance out the window. The women were now inside the warehouse, the van's doors closed. The man with the clipboard was speaking into a phone, his free hand gesturing emphatically. "Time to go," the biker muttered. They gathered the equipment quickly, moving with the careful silence learned from years of practice. The grain elevator's metal stairs creaked softly under their feet as they descended, each sound seeming to echo in the darkness. Outside, they stuck to the shadows, working their way back to where they'd parked Rollo's truck behind an old loading dock. Neither spoke until they were several miles away, the warehouse district fading in the rearview mirror. "That was too close," Rollo said finally, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The biker nodded, his mind already racing ahead to what came next. "Get back to your yard. Need to look at those photos." The tow yard was deserted when they arrived, the guard dogs greeting them with soft whines of recognition. Inside his office, Rollo pulled the blinds and locked the door before emptying the cameras onto his desk. "Take about an hour to develop these," he said, gathering the film rolls. "Got a dark room in the back, old habit from before everything went digital." While Rollo worked, the biker paced the small office, reviewing what they'd seen. The efficiency of the operation, the military precision, the way the men moved and positioned themselves. It all pointed to something bigger than local criminals. Finally, Rollo emerged with a stack of still damp photographs. He spread them across his desk under the harsh fluorescent light. "Got good shots of both vehicles," he said, pointing. "License plate on the SUV is clear enough to read. Van's dealer tags too, might be able to trace those." The biker leaned in, studying the images. Despite the darkness, Rollo's photos had captured crucial details. Faces partially visible in the loading bay lights, distinguishing features like the military boots, even the clipboard with its pages of what looked like schedules or manifests. "This is it," he said quietly. "This is what we need." Rollo nodded slowly. "Yeah, enough to expose the whole operation, if we can figure out who to trust with it." He paused, looking at his old friend. "And if we live long enough to share it." The biker gathered the photos carefully, his mind already turning to the next step. The evidence in his hands could save countless lives. But first, they had to survive long enough to use it. The morning sun cast long shadows through the garage's grimy windows as the biker pulled his motorcycle inside. The familiar smell of motor oil and damp concrete greeted him, but something felt off. The usual quiet murmur of conversation had been replaced by an uneasy silence. The nurse approached him immediately, her normally calm face creased with worry. "Thank goodness you're back," she said in a low voice. "We have a situation." The biker scanned the room, doing a quick head count of the survivors. His stomach tightened when he noticed the gap in their numbers. "Who's missing?" "Jason," the nurse wrung her hands. "He left early this morning, said he needed some air. That was over 2 hours ago." The biker's jaw clenched. He knew the risks of anyone leaving the garage. They'd discussed it extensively. "Did anyone see which way he went?" Before the nurse could answer, the side door creaked open. Jason slipped inside, his thin frame casting a brief shadow before he shut the door behind him. "Where were you?" the biker demanded, his voice gravelly with concern and suspicion. Jason flinched at the direct question. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor, shoulders hunched. "Just went to find some food. Got hungry." The biker studied the teenager carefully. Something wasn't right. Despite the steady drizzle outside, Jason's clothes were completely dry. His sneakers showed no signs of mud or water. And there was that thing with his eyes. The way he wouldn't look up, wouldn't meet anyone's gaze. "Show me what you found," the biker said, keeping his voice neutral. Jason's hands remained stubbornly in his pockets. "Couldn't find anything. Everything's closed or locked up." The nurse stepped closer, her motherly instincts clearly sensing the tension. "Jason, honey, we were worried sick. You know it's not safe out there." "I said I'm sorry, okay?" Jason's voice cracked slightly. He tried to move past them toward the back of the garage where the other kids were huddled. The biker blocked his path. "Empty your pockets." "What?" Jason finally looked up, but his eyes darted away almost immediately. "Why?" "Because I asked you to." The biker's tone left no room for argument. For a moment, it seemed like Jason might refuse or try to run, but then his shoulders slumped in defeat. He pulled his hands from his pockets, turning them inside out. Nothing but lint and an old candy wrapper. The biker noticed how Jason's right hand lingered near his back pocket. All of them. Jason's face paled slightly. That's all I have. Back pocket too. A tense silence filled the garage. Even the younger children seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, their usual whispers falling quiet. The nurse touched the biker's arm. Maybe we should… Back pocket, the biker repeated, his eyes never leaving Jason's face. Now. With trembling fingers, Jason reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small flip phone. It was similar to the one they'd found in the trafficker's van, but newer. The biker snatched it before Jason could react. The teen made a desperate grab for it, but the biker easily held him back with one arm while opening the phone with his other hand. The message history loaded quickly. The biker's blood ran cold as he read, "They're in the old mechanic's garage on Route 16. 12 total. Man with motorcycle watching them. Please don't hurt my sister. You promised." The timestamps showed the messages had been sent just hours ago. The garage erupted in chaos. Several of the women gasped. One of the younger children started crying. The nurse pressed her hand to her mouth in horror. "Jason," she whispered, "what have you done?" The teenager's face crumpled. Tears spilled down his cheeks as he backed away from their accusing stares. "They have my sister!" he shouted, voice breaking. "They said if I helped them find the others, they'd let her go. What was I supposed to do?" The biker grabbed Jason's shirt collar, pushing him against the wall. "How long have you been working with them?" "I'm not working with them," Jason sobbed. "They grabbed Emily last month. Said they'd hurt her if I didn't help them find more kids. I didn't want to, but they showed me pictures of her. She was crying, asking for me." His words dissolved into broken sobs. The biker released him, his anger warring with understanding. He'd seen this before. Traffickers using family members as leverage, turning victims into unwilling accomplices. The nurse moved forward, wrapping her arms around Jason as he slid down the wall. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured. "Why didn't you tell us?" "They said they'd know," Jason choked out. "Said they were watching me if I told anyone." He couldn't finish the sentence. The biker checked the phone again, scrolling through older messages. They painted a horrible picture. Threats, coordinates, demands. The traffickers had been using Jason for weeks, forcing him to help identify potential targets. "We need to move," the biker announced. "They know where we are now. It's not safe." The sound of splintering wood cut him off. The side door burst inward, kicked open with explosive force. A masked figure filled the doorway, dressed in black. The biker reacted instantly, pushing the nurse and Jason behind him. The attacker lunged forward, moonlight glinting off the knife in his hand. Years of street fights and prison yards had honed the biker's instincts. He deflected the first slash, catching the attacker's wrist. But the man was strong and trained. He twisted free, the knife finding flesh. Hot pain blazed across the biker's forearm. Blood immediately began soaking his sleeve. Children screamed. Someone knocked over a tool cabinet with a thunderous crash. The attacker hesitated for a split second, perhaps surprised by the number of witnesses. That hesitation was enough. The biker drove his fist into the man's solar plexus, following with a crushing blow to the throat. The attacker staggered backward, gasping through his mask. He turned and fled into the night, leaving nothing but chaos in his wake. The nurse was already moving, grabbing the first aid kit they'd put together. "Let me see that arm," she commanded. But the biker's attention was fixed on Jason, who had collapsed in the corner, rocking back and forth with his arms wrapped around his knees. "I'm sorry," the teenager kept whispering. "I'm so sorry. They said they'd let her go. They promised. They promised." Blood dripped from the biker's arm onto the concrete floor, as the reality of their situation sank in. They'd been found. Their sanctuary was compromised. And somewhere out there, a young girl named Emily was being used as a pawn in this cruel game. The nurse pressed a bandage against his wound, her hands steady despite the fear in her eyes. Around them, the other survivors huddled together, their brief sense of safety shattered by the night's violence. Jason's sobs echoed through the garage, a sound of pure anguish and guilt that spoke of choices no 15-year-old should ever have to make. The old church loomed against the pre-dawn sky, its weathered stone walls a stark reminder of better days. Broken stained glass windows had been carefully boarded up, and thick vines crawled up the bell tower like grasping fingers. A rusty chain-link fence surrounded the property, keeping curious eyes away from the abandoned building. Rollo's truck led the way through a hidden gate, followed by the biker's Harley. The group had traveled in shifts, using back roads and darkness for cover. The nurse kept the children quiet during the nerve-wracking journey, singing soft hymns that seemed oddly fitting given their destination. "My cousin Marcus keeps an eye on the place," Rollo explained as he unlocked the heavy front doors. "Church board can't decide whether to tear it down or restore it. Meanwhile, it just sits here, forgotten by most folks." Inside, the musty air carried hints of incense and old wood. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the boards, casting long shadows across dusty pews. The sanctuary was large enough to give everyone space, yet small enough to defend if needed. "Better than the garage," the biker muttered, wincing as he helped carry in supplies. Blood had soaked through his makeshift bandage, leaving dark stains on his leather jacket. The nurse noticed immediately. "Sit down," she ordered, pointing to a pew near the altar. "That needs proper cleaning before infection sets in." He didn't argue. The knife wound burned with every movement, and the night's events had drained what little energy he had left. While the others settled into various corners of the church, the nurse opened her medical kit. "This will hurt," she warned, carefully peeling back the blood-soaked cloth. The biker barely flinched as she cleaned the wound with antiseptic. His eyes were fixed on Jason, who had chosen the farthest corner of the church, separated from everyone else by a wall of invisible shame. "He's just a child," the nurse said quietly, following his gaze. "A child forced to make an impossible choice." "I know." The biker's voice was rough with emotion. "Seen it before. They find the weak spots. Family, loved ones. Use them like crowbars to break people open." The nurse's gentle hands paused in their work. "You're not angry with him anymore? Angry?" He shook his head slowly. "No. Just wondering how many other Jasons are out there, being used the same way." Across the church, Rollo had set up his laptop on an old communion table. The flash drive from his camera was plugged in, and his thick fingers moved surprisingly quickly across the keyboard. "Getting these somewhere safe," he explained when the biker walked over, his arm freshly bandaged. "Got a secure cloud account under a fake name. Even if they find us, evidence stays safe." The photos from their stakeout filled the screen. License plates, faces half hidden in shadows. The clinical efficiency of the trafficker's operation. Each image was a piece of proof, a potential key to bringing down the entire ring. "Good thinking," the biker said. "How long?" Rollo glanced at the upload progress bar. "Another hour, maybe less. Internet's spotty out here, but it's moving." A small TV sat on another table nearby, running on battery power. Rollo had brought it along with other supplies, knowing information could be as valuable as weapons in their situation. The morning news played quietly, providing background noise that helped mask the occasional creak of the old building. The nurse had organized the children into small groups, distributing granola bars and juice boxes from their supplies. Some of the younger ones had finally fallen asleep, curled up on blankets spread across the pews. The older survivors sat in clusters, speaking in whispers or simply staring into space. Jason remained alone in his corner, knees pulled up to his chest. No one had approached him since they arrived. The weight of his actions hung heavy in the air, even though most understood the impossible position he'd been in. The biker found himself walking toward the teenager, ignoring the protest from his injured arm. He sat down carefully, leaving enough space to not feel threatening. "Your sister," he said after a long moment. "Tell me about her. Jason's head jerked up, surprise breaking through his misery. What? Emily, right? What's she like? Tears welled in Jason's eyes, but he blinked them back. She's smart. Really smart. Wants to be a veterinarian. Always bringing home hurt animals and trying to fix them. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Mom used to say she had too big a heart. How old? 13. Jason's voice cracked. She just turned 13 last month. They grabbed her walking home from soccer practice. I was supposed to pick her up, but I was late. If I'd just been on time, stop! The biker's tone was firm but gentle. That's what they want, for you to blame yourself. Makes you easier to control. Jason wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Doesn't matter now. I messed everything up. Put everyone here in danger. You did what you thought you had to do to protect your sister. The biker leaned forward, catching Jason's eye. Now we're going to do what we have to do to protect both of you. Before Jason could respond, Rollo's voice cut through the quiet church. Hey, you need to see this. The TV volume had been turned up. A female reporter stood in front of a rundown house, red and blue police lights flashing behind her. Following an anonymous tip about suspected human trafficking activity. However, when police raided the location shortly after midnight, they found the building completely empty. The camera cut to a police spokesperson, his badge gleaming under the news lights. While we take all such reports seriously, this appears to be another false lead. We want to remind the public that making unfounded claims wastes valuable police resources and can hamper real investigations. The biker's hands clenched into fists. He recognized the house. It was the warehouse where he and Rollo had witnessed the drop-off just hours ago. They cleared out, Rollo muttered. Someone tipped them off about the raid. The reporter continued. This marks the third such empty raid in recent months, leading some to question the validity of trafficking reports in the area. Police urge citizens to verify information before making serious allegations. The biker pulled out the burner phone they'd taken from Jason, studying the message history with new understanding. The timestamps, the coordinated movements, the way the traffickers always seemed one step ahead, it all pointed to someone with inside knowledge. They knew, he said quietly. They knew exactly when the police were coming. Someone's protecting them. The nurse had joined them, her face tight with concern. Someone in law enforcement? Has to be. Rollo's voice was grim. Question is, how high up does it go? The news segment ended, replaced by weather reports and local events. But the damage was done. Their last hope of official help had just crumbled away, leaving them alone against an enemy that seemed to have eyes and ears everywhere. The biker looked around the old church, at the faces of those who trusted him to keep them safe. The children sleeping fitfully in the pews. The women watching the TV with haunted eyes. Jason, carrying the weight of his sister's fate. The nurse, still tending to others despite her own exhaustion. Rollo, risking everything to help strangers. They were all vulnerable here, yet each one was precious. Worth fighting for. Worth dying for if necessary. And somewhere out there, Emily and countless others waited for rescue, hoping someone would be brave enough to stand against the darkness that held them captive. The morning sun cast long shadows across the county sheriff's office parking lot as the biker pulled up on his Harley. His wounded arm throbbed beneath the bandage, but determination pushed the pain aside. In his jacket pocket, he carried a flash drive containing copies of the photos and evidence Rollo had gathered. The front desk clerk barely looked up as he entered, her fingers clicking steadily on an ancient keyboard. The walls were lined with wanted posters and community notices, all yellowed at the edges. A familiar musty smell of old coffee and paper files brought back memories he'd rather forget. "Can I help you?" the clerk asked without enthusiasm. "Need to speak with someone about a trafficking case. Got evidence right here." He patted his pocket. She sighed and reached for the phone. But before she could dial, a door opened behind her. Deputy Klein stepped out. his badge catching the fluorescent light. The moment their eyes met, recognition sparked between them. Well, well. Klein's lips curled into a sneer. If it isn't Tommy Two-Time Marshall, still riding that rust bucket of yours? The biker's jaw tightened. He hadn't heard that old nickname in years. Not since Klein had been a rookie cop trying to make a name for himself by harassing ex-cons. It's important, Klein. Got solid evidence of human trafficking. Names, plates, locations. Let's step into my office. Klein's tone was smooth as oil, but his eyes remained cold. He gestured toward a door marked Deputy Sheriff. The office was small but neat, with a carefully arranged desk and a wall of commendations. Klein settled into his chair like a king on his throne, leaving the biker to perch uncomfortably on a hard wooden seat. So, Klein said, folding his hands, tell me about this evidence of yours. The biker pulled out the flash drive and laid it on the desk. Got photos from a drop last night. White panel van. 4 women being moved. License plates. Faces of the traffickers. Text messages showing their routes. He leaned forward. They're moving people through here regular, Klein. Kids, too. Klein picked up the flash drive, turning it over in his hands. And how exactly did you come by this information? Found some of their victims in a van. Got them somewhere safe now. 12 of them, including children. 12 victims? Klein's eyebrows rose. And instead of calling the police immediately, you… What? Decided to play hero? Kept them hidden away somewhere? The biker felt the trap closing but pressed on. Tried calling. Dispatcher wouldn't listen. These people needed help. So you took matters into your own hands. Klein's voice hardened. Just like old times, right? Breaking the law because you think you know better? This isn't about me, the biker growled. There's kids involved. One boy's sister is still out there. Where are they now? Klein cut in. These alleged victims? The biker hesitated. Something in Klein's tone set off warning bells. Somewhere safe. Safe. Klein repeated the word like it tasted bad. He stood up slowly, his hand resting casually near his weapon. Let me make sure I understand. You have 12 people, including minors, held at an undisclosed location. You admit to stealing evidence and conducting unauthorized surveillance. And you expect me to believe you're trying to stop trafficking rather than facilitate it? Check the evidence, the biker said through gritted teeth. It's all there. Oh, we'll check everything. Klein's smile was predatory now. Starting with you. Stand up, please. Hands where I can see them. What? Stand up, Klein repeated, drawing his handcuffs. Thomas Marshall, you're under arrest for suspected kidnapping, human trafficking, and interference with a police investigation. The biker's good arm was wrenched behind his back before he could protest. The cuffs bit into his wrists as Klein recited his rights with obvious satisfaction. This is wrong, the biker growled as Klein marched him through the office. Those people need protection. They'll get it, Klein assured him smoothly. Once we find them. And we will find them. The booking process passed in a blur of fingerprints and flashbulbs. They took his phone, his wallet, everything but the growing certainty that he'd walked right into a trap. Through the holding cell bars, he watched Klein speaking to other officers, gesturing with the flash drive in his hand. An hour later, Klein returned with 2 state police officers. Seems you've graduated to interstate trafficking, he announced. These gentlemen are here to take you to a more secure facility. The burner phone, the biker said suddenly. It was logged into evidence. Where is it? Klein's expression didn't change. What phone would that be? You know damn well what phone. It proves everything I told you. The only thing proven here is that you're still the same criminal you've always been. Klein nodded to the state officers. He's all yours, gentlemen. As they led him out in chains, the biker caught a glimpse of a TV in the break room. His own face stared back at him. An old mugshot now labeled Wanted, Interstate Trafficking Suspect. Back at the church, the small TV crackled with the same news story. The nurse stood among the shocked survivors, watching their protector being branded as their captor. Her hands trembled as she pulled on her coat. "What are you doing?" Rollo asked. "Getting ready," she replied, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "We're not letting him go down for saving us." The children huddled closer together as the news anchor continued to detail the biker's alleged crimes. Jason stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "They're trying to stop us," he said quietly, "just like they did with the raids. They're making him disappear so no one will believe us." The nurse nodded, her jaw set with resolve. "Well, they're about to learn that some people refuse to disappear." She looked around at the group. Former victims who had found their strength, children who had rediscovered their courage, and allies who had chosen to stand with them against the darkness. "We're not letting him go down for saving us," she repeated, each word a promise. "Not now. Not ever." The holding cell was barely big enough for a cot and toilet, its walls a canvas of despair painted in decades of graffiti and grime. The biker sat on the thin mattress, his back against the cold concrete, trying to find a position that didn't make his wounded arm scream in protest. The nurse's careful stitches pulled with every movement, a constant reminder of how quickly everything had fallen apart. A guard walked past, rattling his baton across the bars with a sharp clang. "Comfortable in there, hero?" He sneered the last word like an insult. "Guess saving people ain't as noble as you thought, huh?" The biker didn't respond. He'd learned long ago that silence was often the best defense in places like this. Instead, he focused on the wall ahead, counting cracks to keep his mind off the growing fear for those he'd left behind. 12 faces haunted his thoughts, 11 survivors and one scared kid who'd made a terrible mistake. Through the tiny window high above, he could see patches of gray sky. It was the same view he'd had during his last stint behind bars. But something felt different this time. Back then, he'd been guilty. This time, his conscience was clean. But that seemed to matter even less. Across town, fall leaves skittered across the cracked sidewalk as the nurse led 3 of the women toward a small brick building. A weather-beaten sign read, "County Chronicle," in faded letters. The youngest woman, Maria, clutched a manila envelope to her chest like a shield. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered. "What if they don't believe us either?" The nurse squeezed her shoulder gently. "Carla Martinez has a reputation for uncovering the truth, no matter who tries to bury it. Rollo says she's our best shot." They climbed the worn steps, their footsteps echoing in the quiet stairwell. The newspaper office occupied the 2nd floor, an open room filled with filing cabinets and cluttered desks. Only one showed signs of life, a corner workspace where a woman with reading glasses perched on her nose typed furiously at a computer. "Excuse me," the nurse called out. "Are you Carla Martinez?" The woman looked up, her sharp eyes taking in the group. "That's me. And you are?" "We're the ones from the trafficking van. The ones they're saying he kidnapped." Carla's fingers froze over her keyboard. She stood slowly, gesturing to a cluster of chairs. "Tell me everything." For the next hour, they laid out their story. The nurse described finding safety in the old garage, the care the biker had shown for the children, the risks he'd taken to protect them. Maria shared the horrors of the van, the coded messages on the burner phone, the way the police had ignored their earlier cries for help. "We have proof," the third woman, Sarah, said. She nodded to Maria, who opened the envelope with trembling hands. Photographs spilled across Carla's desk, dark images of the warehouse drop, license plates clearly visible. Time-stamped text messages from the burner phone backup detailed pickup locations and prices for human cargo. Hospital records showed injuries consistent with trafficking. Statement after statement, signed by survivors, told the same story of salvation rather than kidnapping. Carla spread the evidence out like puzzle pieces, her expression growing darker with each new revelation. "This goes deep," she murmured, examining a photo that showed a police cruiser, parked near the warehouse. "How many copies of these materials exist?" 3, the nurse replied. "One set's in a safety deposit box. Another's with a trusted friend. This is the third." Smart. Carla began scanning documents rapidly into her computer. Because the moment this story breaks, they're going to try to make it disappear, just like they're trying to do with your rescuer. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, weaving their testimonies into a narrative that could not be ignored. The women watched as their truth took shape on the screen, their voices finally being heard. "What about the children?" Carla asked, looking up from her work. "Are they safe?" The nurse nodded. "Hidden. Protected. But they need him back. He's the only one some of them trust anymore. Then we'll have to work fast." Carla's eyes gleamed with determination. This isn't just about exposing trafficking. It's about showing how deep the corruption goes. How many people looked away or actively helped hide these crimes. She turned her screen to show them the draft headline. Local biker arrested after saving 12 victims. Law enforcement complicity suspected. "It's perfect," Maria whispered, tears in her eyes. The story took shape over the next few hours. Carla verified sources, cross-referenced details, and built an airtight case that could not be dismissed as mere conspiracy. The nurse provided medical documentation of the victims' conditions. Sarah described the complex network of safe houses and transport routes they'd uncovered. By late afternoon, Carla's blog post was ready. She looked at each woman in turn. "Once I hit publish, there's no going back. Are you ready for what comes next?" They nodded as one. Carla pressed the button. Back at the church, the remaining survivors huddled around Rollo's laptop, watching as the story began to spread. Local news sites picked it up first, then regional outlets. Social media exploded with shares and comments. Within hours, major news networks were reaching out to Carla for interviews. The nurse read the article aloud to the group, her voice steady and clear. The children listened intently, especially when their own stories, carefully anonymized, appeared on the screen. They saw themselves not as victims anymore, but as witnesses to both terrible crimes and incredible courage. "Will he come back now?" a small boy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The nurse looked toward the door, where rain had begun to fall softly outside. In the distance, she could hear sirens, but this time they didn't make the children flinch. Something was changing. The truth was finally being heard. "He will," she replied with quiet certainty. "We're going to bring him home." Morning light filtered through the narrow window of the holding cell, casting long shadows across the biker's weary face. He hadn't slept, spending the night listening to the echoes of footsteps and the distant sound of cell doors clanging shut. His tin's wounded arm throbbed, a constant reminder of everything that had led him here. The guard's voice broke through his thoughts. "Hey, your lawyer's here." The biker frowned. He hadn't called for a lawyer, couldn't afford one even if he wanted to. But when he looked up, he saw Rollo's familiar bulk filling the doorway, dressed in an ill-fitting suit that strained against his shoulders. "Leave us!" Rollo barked at the guard with surprising authority, holding up a briefcase that had seen better days. "Attorney-client privilege." The guard shrugged and walked away. His footsteps fading down the corridor, Rollo waited until they were alone before dropping his professional act. He leaned close to the bars, speaking in a hushed tone that barely carried across the small space. "You look like hell, brother." "What are you doing here?" the biker whispered back, moving closer to the bars. "And where'd you get that suit?" "Goodwill. Had to do something. They weren't letting anyone else in to see you." Rollo glanced over his shoulder before continuing. "But listen, things are happening. That story we helped break? It's everywhere. Every major news network, social media, you name it. People are demanding answers." The biker's expression remained guarded. He'd learned long ago not to trust in hope too quickly. "Doesn't matter if Klein's still pulling the strings here." A smile crept across Rollo's weathered face. "That's the best part. Remember that girl in the van? The quiet one with the green eyes? Turns out she's Sarah Mitchell, daughter of State Senator Mitchell. Been missing for 3 months. When he saw her photo in the article, all hell broke loose." The biker's eyes widened slightly. He remembered the girl. She'd barely spoken 2 words the entire time, but she'd helped calm the younger children during their hiding. "Senators raising holy hell," Rollo continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Called in every favor he had. FBI's involved now, taking over the whole investigation. They're looking into Klein, the trafficking ring, everything." Through the small window, they could hear the normal morning sounds of the jail. Doors opening and closing, voices calling out, the clatter of breakfast carts. But in their corner, time seemed to stand still as the biker processed this information. "The others?" he finally asked. "They're safe? Nurse has them well hidden. Church basement's got more security than Fort Knox now. My cousin called in some friends who owed him favors. Kids are doing better too, getting proper medical care, food." Rollo paused, then added softly, "They ask about you every day." The biker turned away, but not before Rollo caught the flash of emotion in his eyes. For a man who'd spent years building walls around himself, the thought of those children waiting for him hit hard. "There's more," Rollo said. "That evidence we gathered? Photos, phone records, everything? It's being looked at by federal prosecutors right now, and, they're finding connections, big ones. Goes way higher than just Klein and his buddies." A door slammed somewhere in the building, making both men tense. Rollo checked his watch and frowned. "Can't stay much longer without looking suspicious. But listen, Fed boys are coming for you today. When they do, you go with them, understand? No questions, no resistance. These aren't Klein's people." The biker nodded slowly. "How can you be sure?" "Because I've been working with them since last night. They're the real deal. Clean." Rollo straightened his tie, resuming his lawyer persona as footsteps approached. "Just hang tight. Few more hours." The guard reappeared, looking bored. "Time's up." Rollo gathered his briefcase, giving the biker a final meaningful look before following the guard out. The cell block returned to its usual quiet, but something had changed. For the first time since his arrest, the biker felt the weight on his chest lighten slightly. Hours crawled by. He dozed fitfully on the thin mattress, his wounded arm cradled against his chest. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw faces. The children playing quietly in the garage. The nurse tending to injuries with gentle hands. Sarah Mitchell's quiet strength as she helped care for the younger ones. The afternoon sun had begun its descent when new voices echoed through the corridor. Sharp, authoritative tones that carried none of the lazy drawl of the local deputies. The biker sat up, every muscle tense. 4 people appeared before his cell. 3 wore dark suits and carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. The 4th was Deputy Klein, his face twisted in barely contained rage. "Stand up," one of the agents ordered, her voice professional but not unkind. "You're being transferred into federal custody." The biker rose slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Through the bars, he could see Klein's hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "Hands through the slot," another agent instructed. As they cuffed him, the biker studied their faces, looking for any sign this might be another trap. But their eyes held none of the cruel amusement he'd seen in Klein's men. They were serious, focused, and utterly by the book. The cell door opened with a metallic groan. 2 agents flanked him, while the 3rd led the way. Klein followed behind, his footsteps heavy with frustration. They walked through the jail's corridors in silence. Other inmates pressed against their bars to watch the procession. The biker kept his eyes forward, ignoring the whispers and calls that followed their passage. Outside, a black SUV waited in the parking lot. The late afternoon sun made him squint after days in the dim cell. A small crowd of reporters had gathered behind the police tape, cameras flashing as they emerged. Just before they reached the vehicle, the biker paused. "Is this a transfer or an execution?" he asked quietly, voicing the doubt that still nagged at him. The female agent who had first spoken to him turned slightly. A faint smile crossed her face, not mocking, but genuinely reassuring. "No," she replied. "It's the beginning of something better." From behind them, Klein made a sound of disgust, but he could only watch, powerless, as they helped the biker into the SUV's back seat. The door closed with a solid thunk, muffling the outside world and its cameras. The engine started. Through the tinted windows, the biker caught one last glimpse of Klein standing in the parking lot, fists clenched at his sides, as the vehicle pulled away from the jail and into the gathering dusk. The community center auditorium sat hushed and solemn, its worn wooden seats occupied by federal agents, court officials, and a handful of carefully vetted observers. Morning light filtered through high windows, casting gentle beams across the simple stage where a podium stood waiting. The biker shifted uncomfortably in his chair near the side wall, his leather jacket replaced by a clean button-down shirt that felt foreign against his skin. His arm still ached where the knife had caught him, but the stitches were healing well. The nurse's handiwork had seen to that. One by one, they came forward. 12 souls he'd found locked in darkness, now stepping into the light to tell their stories. Some spoke in whispers, others with voices that gained strength as they continued. Each testimony added another piece to the puzzle, painting a picture of systematic abuse and corruption that made even the seasoned federal agents clench their jaws. Sarah Mitchell, the senator's daughter, spoke with quiet dignity about her 3 months in captivity. Her father sat in the front row, gripping his wife's hand so tightly his knuckles showed white. When Sarah described hearing the biker's boots approaching the van that rainy night, her voice caught slightly. "I thought it was them coming back," she said. "But then he opened that door and he looked at us like we were people, not cargo." The youngest victims were spared testifying, but their statements had been recorded carefully, with child advocacy workers present. The recordings played in the hushed auditorium, small voices describing big horrors with the unvarnished honesty of children. When the nurse took the stand, her gray hair neatly pinned back and her spine straight as steel, the biker found himself unable to look directly at her. Her presence over the past weeks had stirred something in him. Memories of his own mother, perhaps, or the kind of person he might have become in another life. "I've worked in trauma wards for 40 years, she began, her voice clear and steady. "I've seen what people can do to each other, but I've also seen what they can do for each other." She looked directly at the biker then, forcing him to meet her gaze. This man they're trying to paint as a criminal. He didn't just save those children. He gave them back their dignity. She described the nights in the garage, how he'd kept watch while others slept, how he'd torn up his own shirt for bandages before getting proper medical supplies. When Jason's betrayal was discovered, she continued, many would have reacted with violence, but he understood. He saw a frightened boy trying to save his sister, not a traitor. The biker's hands tightened on his knees at the memory. He'd been angry, yes, but one look at Jason's face that night had transported him back to his own youth, to impossible choices and desperate attempts to protect those he loved. Jason was the last to testify. He walked to the podium slowly, his thin frame swimming in a borrowed dress shirt, eyes fixed on the floor. At 16, he looked both older and younger than his years. "I need to tell the truth," he started, his voice barely audible at first. "All of it." The room grew even quieter as Jason described how the traffickers had used his sister as leverage, promising her safety if he helped them track down the escaped group. He explained the burner phone they'd given him, the threats, the coordinates he'd sent. "I thought," he swallowed hard, his composure cracking. "I thought I was protecting her. But he..." Jason looked at the biker, tears now flowing freely down his face. "When they found out what I did, he didn't hurt me. He looked at me and said, 'We'll get her too.' And they did. They found her. They saved her." Jason's hands gripped the podium, his knuckles white. "He saved me anyway. I don't deserve it. I betrayed everyone, but he still..." The boy's voice broke completely. The lead federal agent, a composed woman named Reynolds, stepped forward. "Take your time, Jason." After several deep breaths, Jason continued. He detailed the messages he'd sent, the locations he'd revealed, everything he could remember about his interactions with the traffickers. Each word seemed to lift a weight from his shoulders, even as they added to the mounting evidence against the corruption that had allowed such crimes to flourish. The biker watched it all from his corner, his expression unreadable. But inside, something was shifting. Years of carrying his past like armor, using his fists to keep the world at bay. It all felt different now. The hands that had thrown so many punches, that had gripped prison bars and handlebars and anger itself, had somehow found a better purpose. "They said they'd kill her if I didn't help them," Jason was saying, his voice steadier now. "But he taught me something. He showed me that sometimes you have to stand up, even when you're scared, even when it seems impossible." The boy straightened his shoulders slightly. "I want to help stop them now. I'll testify against anyone, everyone who was involved. It's what he would do." The lead agent nodded, making notes in her folder. Other officials whispered among themselves, papers shuffling importantly. But the biker barely noticed them. He was watching Jason return to his seat, walking taller than when he'd stood up, as if speaking his truth had begun to heal something broken inside him. A court official, a serious-looking man with wire-rimmed glasses, stood and cleared his throat. The room fell silent again. Having heard these testimonies, and in light of the substantial evidence provided regarding the trafficking operation and the corruption within local law enforcement, he adjusted his glasses, consulting his notes. "All charges against the accused are hereby dropped." The official turned to face the biker directly. "Furthermore, a full federal investigation is now underway, focusing on both the trafficking ring and the law enforcement officials who facilitated their operations." He paused, then added with careful emphasis, "Your cooperation in this ongoing investigation would be greatly appreciated." The biker nodded slightly, but his attention was elsewhere. He was looking at the faces around him. The nurse's gentle smile, Jason's tentative look of hope, Sarah Mitchell's quiet strength, and all the others who had found their voices in this simple auditorium. For the first time in longer than he could remember, his hands rested easily in his lap. They didn't itch for a fight or clench with remembered rage. They felt different, like tools that had finally found their proper use, like maybe, just maybe, they had done something right. The official was still speaking, outlining next steps and procedures, but the words washed over the biker like distant waves. In his mind, he was back in that rainy parking lot, hearing those first faint sounds from the van. One choice, one moment of refusing to walk away, had changed everything. Not just for the 12 souls he'd found, but for himself as well. The morning light had shifted, drawing long rectangles on the auditorium floor. In one of these bright spaces, the nurse had reached over to squeeze Jason's shoulder, offering silent support. The boy managed a shaky smile in return, then turned that smile toward the biker. Tentative, grateful, and full of a hope that seemed to fill the entire room. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked parking lot as the biker and Rollo stood before the weathered building. Paint peeled from its wooden trim, and weeds pushed through the concrete. But to the biker, it was the most beautiful sight he'd seen in years. "Well, would you look at that?" Rollo said, scratching his beard and squinting up at the fresh sign. "Second Chance Garage, repairs and redemption." He chuckled. "Never thought I'd see you running a legit business." The biker ran his calloused hand along the building's rough brick wall. 2 months had passed since the federal hearing, but sometimes it still felt like a dream. The senator, grateful for his daughter's rescue, had set up a foundation to help trafficking survivors rebuild their lives. When community members who'd followed the story started making quiet donations, the biker found himself with an unexpected opportunity. "Place needs work," the biker muttered, but his eyes were soft as he surveyed his new property. "Everything worth having needs work," Rollo replied, pulling out a ring of keys. "Speaking of which, got those parts you asked for in my truck. That old lift in there ain't gonna fix itself." Inside, sunlight filtered through grimy windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. The space was huge. 3 service bays, an office area, and a small break room that still smelled faintly of ancient coffee. Tools lay scattered about, left behind by the previous owner who'd abandoned the place years ago. The biker moved through the space slowly, touching rusted tool chests and old diagnostic equipment. Each step echoed with possibility. This wasn't just going to be a repair shop. It would be a sanctuary, a place where people could rebuild more than just engines. "Got the first interview today," he said, voice gruff with emotion he wasn't used to showing. "Kid from the halfway house, says he knows his way around cars." Rollo nodded approvingly. "Good. Teaching these kids a trade, giving them honest work, that's something real." He paused, then added with a smirk, "Plus, you get free labor out of it." The biker shot him a look, but there was no heat in it. They both knew what this place meant, what it could become. The morning progressed quickly as they worked to get the space ready. They cleared debris, organized tools, and tackled the temperamental lift system. Around noon, the nurse arrived, carrying a box of office supplies and wearing a determined expression. "The counseling room is going to need better lighting," she announced, setting down her load. "And proper chairs. Can't have people opening up about trauma while sitting on milk crates." The biker nodded, wiping grease from his hands. The nurse had surprised them all by getting certified in trauma counseling over the past 2 months. Now she'd be splitting her time between traditional nursing and helping at the garage, offering support to those who came seeking more than just mechanical repairs. Jason arrived next, earlier than his scheduled shift. The boy had changed since the hearing, stood straighter, met people's eyes more often. He'd been the first person the biker had hired, despite initial protests from social services about child labor laws. "I got the shelves organized in the storage room," Jason reported, already reaching for a broom, "and Sarah's coming in later to help set up the front desk computer system." Sarah was one of the women they'd rescued that rainy night. She'd proven to be whip-smart with computers, teaching herself coding during sleepless nights at the shelter. Now, she managed their scheduling system and was helping other survivors learn technical skills. The biker watched Jason sweep, remembering the terrified boy from the church who'd thought his life was over after his betrayal. Now, here he was, rebuilding himself, alongside the engines and transmissions they'd be fixing. Throughout the afternoon, more people filtered in and out. A probation officer stopped by to discuss potential referrals. A local business owner brought coffee and asked about apprenticeship programs. The nurse conducted her first informal counseling session in what used to be the break room, speaking softly with a young woman who couldn't stop wringing her hands. The biker found himself in Bay 3, hunched over a carburetor that had seen better days. The familiar work centered him, gave his hands something useful to do while his mind processed the strange turn his life had taken. 2 months ago, he'd been a drifter with a record, someone society had written off. Now he was, what? A business owner? A mentor? The thought still felt foreign. The afternoon light was turning golden when he heard quick footsteps approaching. Looking up from his work, he saw a small figure darting between tool chests and parts bins, making a beeline for his station. It was Lucy, one of the younger kids they'd rescued that night. She lived with her aunt now, just a few blocks away, and had appointed herself the garage's unofficial mascot. "Uncle!" she called out, a nickname that had stuck despite his gruff protests. "I made cookies. Mom helped, but I did most of it." The biker carefully set down his wrench and wiped his hands on a nearby rag. Lucy threw herself at his legs, hugging him with the unrestrained joy only children can manage. He felt something in his chest tighten, then release, like an engine finally turning over after years of silence. The garage had filled with people by now. Jason was meticulously cleaning his workbench, taking pride in keeping his tools organized. Sarah's voice carried from the front desk as she answered phones and scheduled appointments. The nurse sat with a nervous-looking man who'd come in about the job posting, offering him tea and gentle encouragement. Looking around at this unlikely family he'd gathered, the biker felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Peace. Real, solid peace that settled in his bones and made his perpetually tense shoulders finally relax. Lucy tugged at his coveralls, holding up a slightly squashed cookie. "Try it," she insisted. "I put extra chocolate chips in yours." He took the cookie carefully, as if it were made of gold instead of flour and sugar. In a way, it was more precious than any metal. It was proof of healing, of trust rebuilt, of second chances that actually meant something. "Thank you, sweetheart," he said softly, and for once, his voice held no trace of its usual gruffness. The late afternoon sun streamed through the newly cleaned windows, catching dust motes and turning them to floating stars. In that golden light, the garage looked less like a repair shop and more like what it truly was, a place of new beginnings, where broken things and broken people could find their way back to wholeness. The biker took a bite of his cookie, let himself smile, and got back to work on the carburetor. He had a lot to do, and for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he needed to be. The morning sun painted the highway in shades of gold, warming the biker's shoulders as he guided his Harley down the familiar stretch of road. The engine's rumble beneath him felt different now, less like an escape route and more like a steady heartbeat carrying him forward. His leather vest, worn but well-maintained, bore the Second Chance Garage logo carefully stitched on the back. The patch showed a wrench crossed with a rising sun. Rollo's idea, though he'd never admit it. In his saddlebags, carefully protected folders held stacks of glossy flyers announcing their newest venture, Haven House, a safe space for trafficking survivors. The biker remembered the night the idea had first taken shape. It was during one of their weekly community dinners at the garage, when Sarah had mentioned how many survivors struggled to find stable housing. The nurse had looked up from her coffee, that familiar determined glint in her eye, and said simply, "So let's build them one." Now, 3 months of planning later, they had secured an old boarding house on the edge of town. The renovations would start next week, with many of their garage apprentices volunteering their weekends to help. The biker smiled slightly, remembering how Jason had immediately offered to lead the electrical work team. The kid had found his calling in rewiring old systems. Traffic thinned as he took the exit toward the community center. His grip tightened slightly on the handlebars, a familiar tension creeping into his shoulders. Public speaking wasn't his thing, never had been. But when the high school counselor had called, asking him to share his story at their youth outreach program, something in him knew he couldn't refuse. "These kids need to hear from someone real," the counselor had said. "Someone who's been through the darkness and found their way back." The darkness. The biker's mind drifted to that rainy night months ago, to the sound of frightened breathing from inside a locked van. He'd been running then, trying to escape his own demons. Instead, he'd found purpose. A group of teenagers lounged on the community center's front steps, looking up as his Harley rumbled into the parking lot. He could read their expressions, a mixture of wariness and curiosity. Not long ago, he would have ignored them, kept his head down, moved past quickly. Now he gave them a small nod as he parked, noticing how one boy's eyes lingered on the garage's logo. As he dismounted, he heard familiar voices approaching. Jason was there, dressed in clean work clothes, his tool belt absent for once. The nurse walked beside him, carrying a box of informational packets about Haven House. Sarah and Maria, 2 of the women from that first rescue, followed close behind. They all wore matching t-shirts with the garage logo, looking more like a family than a random collection of souls thrown together by circumstance. "Thought you might want some moral support," the nurse said with a knowing smile. She'd been the one to help him outline his speech, sitting late into the night at the garage's break room table, helping him find the right words. "Kids are already inside," Jason added, gesturing toward the building. "Full house." The biker nodded, trying to quell the flutter of nervousness in his stomach. Public speaking was definitely not his strong suit. Give him a broken transmission any day over a room full of expectant faces. They walked together toward the community hall's entrance. Through the glass doors, he could see rows of chairs filled with students, teachers standing along the walls, a podium set up at the front. A banner hung above it all, its letters bold and clear. "Hope rides again." The nurse touched his arm gently. Remember what we talked about. Just tell them the truth. That's all they need to hear. The truth. It had taken him so long to face his own. The years wasted running. The daughter he'd abandoned. The life he'd thrown away. But that truth had led him here, to this moment, to these people who'd become his family. Sarah stepped forward, adjusting his vest slightly. "You've got this, boss," she said with a grin. The confidence in her voice steadied him. This was the same woman who'd been too terrified to speak when they'd first found her. Now she ran their front office like a seasoned professional, mentoring other survivors in business skills. Through the doors, he could hear the principal finishing her introduction. His cue was coming. Jason moved to his side, speaking low enough that only the biker could hear. "Remember what you told me that night at the church? When I thought I'd ruined everything?" The boy's eyes were clear and direct now, so different from the haunted look they'd held back then. "You said everybody deserves a second chance. Even me." The biker remembered that conversation clearly, holding a terrified teenager who'd just confessed to betraying them, and somehow finding words of forgiveness instead of anger. It had been a turning point for both of them. The principal's voice rose. "Please welcome our special guest speaker." Maria squeezed his hand quickly. "We're right here with you." The biker took a deep breath and removed his sunglasses, tucking them into his vest pocket. The nervous flutter in his stomach settled into something calmer, more purposeful. These weren't just random teenagers he was about to address. They were kids like Jason had been, like his own daughter had been, standing at crossroads they might not even recognize yet. He stepped through the doors and walked toward the podium, aware of his family settling into seats in the front row. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on him. This rough-looking man in a leather vest, about to tell them a story about darkness and light, about wrong turns and right deeds, ones about second chances that come disguised as rainy nights and desperate choices. At the podium, he gripped the edges lightly and looked out over the sea of young faces. In that moment, he wasn't nervous anymore. He had something these kids needed to hear, something he wished someone had told him when he was their age. "I was once just a man on a bike, trying to outrun regret," he began, his voice steady and clear. "But one night, in a dark parking lot, God gave me a second chance. Not just to live, but to matter."